We are live.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sandra Kilgore, the Chair of the Planning and Economic Development Committee. And I'd like to welcome you to the February 20th, 2023 remote meeting. All Council committee members and staff are participating virtually. And to help our audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda aloud. We are streaming live on our Virtual Engagement Hub, which is accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the front page of our city website. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone. For those of you out there with us today, welcome. And for today's meeting, we have the option for people to call in and comment live during the meeting. And to call in and comment live, use the same number, 855-925-2801, meeting code 8187. Your phone will be muted and you will hear the meeting live. At this point, speakers will need to push *3 to enter the speaking queue. And at this time, I'd like to do a roll call and introduce the committee members and staff who are participating virtually. Councilman staff, as I call your name, please say a quick hello. Councilwoman Sage Turner.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Councilwoman Maggie Ullman.
Hey, everybody.
Assistant City Manager Ben Woody.
Hey, everybody. Good afternoon.
Assistant City Attorney Janice Ashley. Is she not here today? Okay. So Urban Planner Vidila Saviska. And we also have Sasha Bertuski, who is the Affordable Housing Officer.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay. And at this time, can I get a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
Okay. Do a roll call. Councilwoman Sage Turner.
Aye.
Councilwoman Maggie Ullman.
Aye.
And myself, Sandra Kilgore. Aye. And at this time, we would like to do a turn it over to Ben Woody, who will be doing a presentation.
Thank you, Chair Kilgore and Katie. If you can go ahead and start the presentation, please. So first of all, I just want to thank everybody for being here today and say hello to our Planning and Economic Development Council Committee. This is our first meeting with this iteration of the Council Committee. Chair Kilgore, this is your first meeting as chair of this committee, and Councilwoman Ullman, welcome to the Planning and Economic Development Committee. And so what I'm going to do real quickly is run through a presentation and give a scope overview of this committee. If you can go to the next slide, please, Katie. So key takeaways is the PED committee was established by council to review policy updates and make recommendations as it relates to council goals of a thriving local economy and maintaining a well-planned and livable community. We're going to touch on the next slide a little more about the composition of this council committee. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit today about the scope of work of the committee and begin a conversation about developing a work plan for this committee and beginning to advance plan for future agendas. Next slide, please. And if any council members have questions, please feel free to stop me. So the PED membership, Planning Economic Development, it consists of 3 council members, Councilmember Kilgore, Turner, and Ullman. Staff support for this council committee is myself, Ben Woody is Assistant City Manager, Katie Noun, who is also in the City Manager's office, and our primary department director. So these are the departments that will bring probably the majority of items or issues for consideration by this council committee. Is Ken Putnam with Transportation, Chris Corral with DCREF, which is the Department of Community and Regional Entertainment Facilities. That one's always a mouthful. And then Nikki Reed at Tom's CED, so the Community and Economic Development Department will have a business before this committee. And currently I am the interim Planning and Urban Design Director, but hope to not be that for very long. We've got several planners on the call today, and a lot of your agenda items will come from the planning department. Typically, we meet at 4 p.m. on the second Monday of each month. We had to reschedule this month, so we're actually meeting on the third Monday, but this Typically, we do this on the second Monday. Next slide, please. So your scope, and again, earlier this year, council voted to reorganize their council committees. So we have 6 council committees now. And as part of that reorganization, council determined or kind of defined the scope of each committee of each of those 6. So for this particular committee, you are supporting the council, the overall council's long-range vision and their comprehensive planning goals. You are to provide direction on development policies and processes, as well as transportation standards, and ensure that we are employing sustainable development and redevelopment strategies when possible. Additionally, your committee provides economic development strategies that enhance the health and economy and improve the employability of Asheville residents. And finally, your committee ensures that all local proposals account for and connect with and support plans of adjacent jurisdictions and the surrounding region. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of policy topics for PED. And again, these are areas that I think moving forward, I'm hoping that we can begin to build some future agenda work sessions or topics around these policy areas. Make sure that our departments that are engaged in these can bring you information for your consideration. So again, that's part of what we want to lead into with our work planning over the next year. But I'm not going to read all these, but you can see there is a number of topics that PED is responsible for. That's everything from land use and planning to transportation topics to infrastructure, utilities, public spaces, arts, culture, a heavy component of regionalism, also economic development. So there's a lot on the table for this committee. Next slide, please. And so in terms of the alignment of the PED committee, your primary priority alignment is, and these are alignments with the City Council's current strategic priorities. So principally, you'll see policy issues that relate to neighborhood resilience, improving and expanding core services, and equitable and affordable housing and stability, which is one we're going to talk about today as the next agenda item. Other priorities that connect to PED are reimagining public safety, houselessness strategies, and reparations. Next slide, please. So looking forward a little bit, as I think as the public probably just realized, we approved minutes from October, so it's been some time since this committee met. But a couple of things that we know are on the horizon is next month we'd like to schedule some time to talk about work plan development. I know that Councilwoman Turner is on the HCD committee. They've done a fantastic job of developing a work plan, hoping that we can have that type of conversation here at this committee and begin to have some connectivity with our advisory boards and departments. Also, a couple of items that are coming up are related to the Pack Square Visioning project that you're probably aware of, that planning department is taking the lead on. Steph Monson-Dahl is the project leader for that. And then out into the future, a little further, we have things that you're probably aware of to some extent, but we'll be bringing the Duke Energy Rankin substation when that's ready to move forward. Would like to bring back College and Patton, the downtown bicycle lane project for discussion. The transit master plan, which is something that is proposed to be funded in the upcoming budgets. That'll be a big item to discuss at this committee. And then I'd like to get transportation here to talk about their efforts with the Close the Gap plan that was recently adopted. Next slide, please. So again, back to the key takeaways. Hopefully that gave not only the committee, but the community that's watching a better understanding of what the PED committee reviews, the types of policy they consider. Hopefully everybody's familiar with the meeting schedule. And again, just the commitment of working with staff and the council committee together to really hone in on our work plan and the topics we want to discuss, or you want to discuss as a body. So that concludes my presentation. I can answer any questions. Great, thank you.
Okay, I'd like to thank you very much, Ben, for presenting that, and also for the insight that you've given us. And I'm looking forward to Sage assisting us in working on the work plan so we can get it up and running. Okay, now we'd like to actually have a presentation on the missing middle housing, and that'll be done by Adelia Sabasco.
Hi, council members. Good afternoon. I'm Vidila Sadika with Planning and Urban Design. Before I get going, I'd like to introduce Kendra Tashoma. She's a new staff person who just started with us a little while ago, and she's working in long-range planning with me and with us, and will be a key part of this project. So I just wanted you to meet her, and if you can, Kendra, to introduce yourself and just say a couple words about where you're coming from.
Sure. Thank you, Vidila. Good afternoon, council members. As Vidila stated, my name is Kendra Tashoma, and I am a new long-range planner here with the city of Asheville. I did last serve as a senior planner with the city of Savannah. So I look forward to working with you all. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Vidila. Thank you.
Welcome, Kendra. This is Sage. Always wonderful to see a female planner, but especially coming from Savannah.
Thank you, Sage.
Welcome.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Kendra. And Kendra's been super helpful, insightful already. So we're going to have a great team. So we are bringing to you a discussion about a contract for the missing middle housing study that is scheduled to go to the City Council on the 28th of this month. But we wanted to come to you first just to talk a little bit about what's coming, so you know what's ahead, and you could let us know if you have any suggestions or guidance. Just to remind you and anybody who might be watching this who isn't familiar with missing middle, the idea is encapsulated here in the image, but it's really that over the last 70 years or so, we haven't been seeing a lot of housing types that you see in the middle. We've been getting a lot of the extremes on one side, a lot of detached single-family homes, and in larger apartment redevelopment projects. But we haven't been seeing a lot of the more traditional type of infill that are smaller scale apartment homes, duplexes, triplexes, quads, bungalow courts, things like this that really fit into neighborhoods. And so we're doing this study to help us think about housing barriers, in particular, possible housing types that might fit in really well into Asheville's residential areas. So if we can go to the first slide, please. We'll start with some takeaways. First, our city goals seek to encourage responsible growth and increase and diversify the housing supply. These are key to this project. It's important to know that most of the residential property in Asheville excludes missing middle housing, which puts downward pressure on the production of housing, limiting housing options. And I'll go through some images to show you that. We want to remind you that the council has provided $85,000 to the planning department for this study. And what might be some new information is that we have received $30,000 from Community and Economic Development to increase our budget so that we can conduct a displacement risk assessment to help us understand the possible negative impacts that might occur if we implement sort of a liberalization of zoning, and so that part of the study is really important, and we're really excited that we could get that money to do that. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, these two goals align with the study to encourage responsible growth and increase housing supply. I want to call out that we've done previous work that has sought to reduce barriers to infill. Here at the bottom, you can see in 2015, we revised our accessory dwelling unit code to allow for more ADUs in the city. And then in 2016 and 17, we did some changes to our residential zoning districts that we called small scale infill development. And it basically reduced minimum lot sizes by 20% and minimum lot frontages by 20%. And I primarily oversaw both of those. So if you have any questions, I can answer those really easily. Next slide, please. So this is an image that shows really well what we have for residential property in Asheville. You see two different colors, yellow and orange. The yellow signifies the zoning districts that only permit single-family housing, and the orange is the zone, or include all the zoning districts that allow for single-family and multifamily housing. And so it's important to know, as you can see here, that really 2/3 of our residential zoning districts only permit single-family housing. So it's quite restrictive. And that may be something that this study looks at and provides us more information for thinking about how to potentially look at the regulations and possibly make adjustments. Next slide. So this is called the Missing Middle Housing Study for the reasons that I've mentioned. The broad description of work, I'll just read this. The study proposes to identify regulatory and policy barriers aiming to improve housing opportunity, diversity, and choice, and to provide a strategy to prioritize options to remove those barriers. The project will include a displacement risk assessment to analyze displacement vulnerability for anti-displacement strategies focused on minimizing possible harm of pro-housing policies. And the schedule is basically to take about a year, from about next month to March of 24. Next slide.
Vidila, is that like all done and wrapped up and back to council in a year, or?
Yes, I think so. I think in the contract, they're actually proposing that it's only going to take 6 to 9 months, but we're thinking in order to allow sufficient time to have public engagement, and things always go slower than we expect, to give ourselves a little cushion. So that would be the end of the study, and then we would come to you and talk about possible regulatory changes. All right, thank you. Next slide. This image shows some different typologies of what is the missing middle formula, if you want to think about it. Different types of homes that might fit into the missing middle. This is, I think, important to show because we're not talking about large buildings that sometimes people associate with added housing into neighborhoods. These types of structures would add more people, but it's a scale and a size that fits with traditional neighborhoods. In fact, most of the oldest neighborhoods in Asheville, Montford, even parts of West Asheville, have buildings like this that are relatively low in scale, not higher primarily than about 3 stories. And they fit in with the landscape. There's plenty of room for trees, at least when they're done well. There's plenty of projects that don't look as lovely as these do, but this is the goal, and this is what we're hoping to identify and to provide more flexibility for through the study. Next slide. So we have some consultants that have been selected as the highest ranked team. They are called Opticos Design Incorporated from the Bay Area. They have sub-consultants named Cascadia Partners from Portland, Oregon. Cascadia would be doing the feasibility analysis and the displacement risk analysis. It's a small team that coined the term missing middle housing, and this is really their niche. So they're very good at this, and they've done these types of studies in other cities all throughout the U.S., including in North Carolina. Next slide. And here's a list of work tasks. I'll also read through these. Feel free to stop me if you want to talk about any of them, but reviewing the existing housing conditions, analysis and comparison of possible housing typologies, reviewing, analyzing, and making recommendations to zoning, considering the possibility of mobility and parking, which is an integral part of housing, right? Providing parking takes up a lot of room, and so we're going to look at that. Consideration of the extent of utilities, and in some cases where there aren't utilities, the appropriateness of housing design recommendations. To remind you, we can only provide housing design recommendations when it's 3 units or more. We can't constrict the single family housing by state legislature. Consideration of manufactured housing appropriateness, consideration of topography, public engagement, looking at the potential impacts that recommendations may have on existing neighborhoods. And I have here at the end in bold, the displacement risk analysis to really look at possible impacts that may result of gentrification and displacement and how to lower or minimize any of those impacts, especially to lower income, marginalized, historically Black communities. So that's the overarching thinking. Next slide. I think we might be getting near the end here. Yeah, so this is just a summary of what we mentioned in the beginning. The key takeaway is, again, to remember that this is aligning with our goals, that most of residential property in Asheville is single-family zoned today, and that this budget comes from your guidance to our department and from Community and Economic Development, totaling $115,000. And I think that's the last slide. If you want to turn it to the next one, just we'll leave it there for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Vidila. I want to ask you a question. I noticed that you said you implemented, I think it was on slide 2015 and 17, the infill. And I was just wondering, do you have an idea as to which communities actually took advantage of that particular zoning? I think it was more or less sort of catered to a certain areas that sort of took advantage where other areas really didn't bother. So how does that, I was just wondering, what does that look like?
Yeah. So when we made those changes, we actually made them across all residential districts. So whether you were in what tends to be a higher density district, what used to be our smallest, our densest districts had a minimum 5,000 square foot area and a minimum 50-foot frontage. Those frontages were decreased from 50 feet to 40 feet, and the minimum lot went from 5,000 square feet to 4,000 square feet. But we have large lots as well. In RS2, the lot size went from 20,000 square feet to 16,000 square feet, and the minimum frontage went from 100 feet to 80 feet. So across the board, all zoning districts were allowed to become a little bit smaller. And I think it happened throughout the city. People took advantage of it.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to share how excited I am to finally be studying this, even if it does take a whole year. I think so many of our problems, if not every problem or issue we face in this community, can be tied to housing. And I think we're still in the middle of a housing crisis here, at least an affordability crisis. And I want to intentionally connect missing middle housing to the affordability crisis, because I just think it's something that this community has long wanted. And often when we're reviewing some of the bigger projects, we're hearing people say what they prefer to see is more missing middle. Why does it have to be so big? Why does it have to have huge parking lots? Why does it have to be so out of scale with the house next door? And this is such a critical piece. And I'm shocked to hear that 2/3 of the community is zoned single family. So we have cities around the nation that are starting to just do away with all single family in general. And I know just from campaigning and stuff, I never really got the feeling that this community was ready for that big step. But I hope that we can focus some intention along like corridors and existing transportation lines. And, Opticos is a wonderful firm, so I'm sure they're already coming at it from that angle. But I'm just really excited. And I wanted to intentionally draw it, the tie to affordability right out of the gate. And I'm glad you're going to be overseeing, Vidila, because you've handled a lot of these things in succession. Even like the open space impacted some of this, right? And even what we tried to do with urban centers as part of this conversation. So thrilled.
I want to jump into with similar enthusiasm to Sage. I think that, or Councilwoman Turner, I think that, just to echo a lot of that sentiment is we can't have one size fit all solutions to our housing crisis. And we know that this is a missing piece of our community. I think it's also really wise that before we go in and propose any real technical changes, we bring in experts to study it in a technical way, because I think the market will tell us if it's going to work, right? If the development community isn't going to value a tool or an approach or a zoning shift or a zoning change, it's just not going to take, it's not going to catch. And so really having that thoughtful analysis now is really valuable. And I had two questions, and maybe the project needs to get started before you'll know more answers. But the first one is around kind of the community engagement along this process. I think that how our community grows, where, when, why are really complex conversations that a lot of our community has really strong feelings on and strong thoughts on and has had experiences with. So curious in the engagement, and I know that there'll be a steering committee, and then I also see that before coming to talk to us today that you talked to the Urban Forestry Commission. Curious if like the Neighborhood Advisory Committee is involved or any of that. I also hearken back to, as Councilwoman Turner mentioned, we just went through conversations around open space, and there was a lot of really dynamic, thorough community engagement on that. And I expect that, to have what comes out of this study be something we can really work with. Having that community engagement baked in through this process will really prepare us. So I guess maybe that's not a question. It's just kind of a statement that I hope that design really comes through and that the effort and time is part of what we're doing. The other thing I did want to ask is, kind of for my learning, what type of outcomes is it reasonable for the community to expect from this study? I think in planning, sometimes the community, it's just helpful for us to be able to share kind of what to expect. The county's doing a comp plan right now, for example, and I've talked with several people who are like, what even is that? That's a bunch of flowery words. And my planner self is like, oh, no, this is really important to set our direction. But when we're done with this, are we going to have technical UDO update recommendations, specific maps and overlay possible suggestions, or are we, which is nice, right? That's kind of where we can be actionable, but sometimes we need to do more work before we can get there. So if that isn't where we are, that's okay. Although I would love us to get there as quickly as we can. Is it more directional goals and like conceptual areas where we might do work? So do you have any more information to, elaborate on what the final outcome will look like so that we can be communicating with the community and really just setting ourselves up to really expect the same thing that you're expecting?
Sure. Thanks for that, Council Member Ullman. Yes. So the deliverable will be a report that will provide us with the base conditions of Asheville, a lot of analysis that looks at how this type of review works in other places, what are our existing barriers, and then a specific list of recommendations for changes. Hopefully most of those should be related to things that we can control, like zoning. Others may be outside of our control, but recommendations, for example, maybe there's a building code that is problematic, right? So that I think the more information that we have, regardless of whether we control it, is important so that other people, state legislators, can know and the word can continue to spread. But we will get a document that recommends changes that we can make, that then we as a community can take and have community conversations to determine what we believe is appropriate, where we think it's appropriate, and then we can go through that conversation to make the actual regulatory changes that our department can make. So this isn't going to be clear to the public. This isn't going to change anything, but this will give us a lot more information so that we can more comprehensively be able to make changes. These changes that we made for ADUs and small scale infill, they were kind of little one-offs that we happened to focus on that maybe some people drew our attention to, but this will be a thorough review of the city and more broad problems or broad issues that it'll help us to focus on.
I'll speak up a little bit about what we kind of mentioned, the work plan and my role on HCD is kind of being the pilot for the boards and commissions potential restructuring. So Councilwoman Ullman, to your point, as far as getting proper input and stuff, so this committee could say, as we develop our work plan, that it's crucial for us to hear from the Affordable Housing Committee by June or something. And then, we're creating like an action that can then go to a committee and come back to us with input, which is a new way of doing things. And that's how we're experimenting with HCD and affordable housing and HIAC, et cetera. It's been going really well. So I think there will be ample opportunity for that. But also we want to remember that structure as a potential just boards and commissions change in general.
And also I'd like to say, basically with this report, I actually think that this will give people the information that they need. And I think people may be more amenable to some of these changes if they understand what exactly we're doing, just like Meg said. And I'm looking forward to it. And I think that's basically, if we'd have had this a while back, then we could have had more changes. I was looking at the Living National Plan, where it actually said something about they basically wanted to see 2 or 3 annual changes in improving and as far as the zoning. And so I would like to ask you, Badilla, since the Living National Plan has been implemented, how many actual zoning updates have we had?
Well, I don't have the number on the top of my head. I know we've made quite a few, but they've been related to all kinds of issues in the UDO, right? From hotels to infill to ADUs, homestays, many issues that I don't specifically focus on in the UDO. Janice might be better to answer this question than I am, but we've done lots of amendments specifically to housing, not that many.
Oh. Thank you, Janice.
That's a good question. I don't know if we've kept a list. I can echo Vadilla. I know it's been many and big ones. Well, Councilwoman Turner mentioned the urban centers. That was the biggest change that we have ever done. We're still, it got implemented, but we're still in litigation over whether we can sustain that. But no, these other ones that the Vadilla mentioned, and this has come up before too, but those changes in accessory dwelling units and the infill development, we might even have to get better at the metrics, because I know I've always wanted to know how many infill units were constructed, how many lots were reconfigured or maybe sold, and we might not be tracking it because they're not the same size developments that get review. So council, we only see a certain level of development, larger multifamilies. We never review single families or just lot development or subdivision. So it might be a different area to get those statistics, but I would say those are good questions.
Also, some of the changes and updates we made to stormwater. I mean, there's been a lot, but I don't think we keep a list. It'd be interesting, just even measuring the impact of what we're changing. It's a good question.
Okay, do I have any more comments from staff or so? At this time, we'd like to take public comment. See if there is anyone in the queue.
Let me check one moment. We do not have anyone in the queue.
Okay. So at this time,
wait, can I say something before you adjourn?
Sure. Yes.
Because we're kind of forming a new committee here. Gwen was our previous chair forever. So Vice Mayor is now our new chair. I don't know the proper avenue for requesting agenda items, if I should just call you offline, but I want to drop something in our attention that maybe we can pick up and learn more about if possible in the future. And I emailed Councilwoman about this earlier. I'm just becoming more and more concerned about our downtown And when I think of planning and particularly economic development, I think of downtown. And I won't even go into all of my concerns, but I'm wondering if this committee might like to brainstorm a little bit or talk about the economic development or the importance of downtown as we frame and prepare for a retreat, which I intend to bring up downtown during that retreat. So just putting it out there, and Chair, maybe you can talk with the staff liaison and kind of coordinate that, or check with other councilwomen if they are interested in any of that. But I just want to put it out there. I'm getting increasingly worried, and I'd love for us to talk about it.
You're absolutely right, Sage, and I'm so happy you brought that up. And when I read your email, it's like, that was, how did we miss that? Because that's one of the most important, issues right here that's affecting Asheville. And it's centered, it's in the center of all this. So we definitely need to do this.
Yeah, I'll just chime in that I had a similar response, and as thinking towards the retreat, kind of, is there value for a geographic zoom in some of our priorities in the coming years?
Yes.
Chair Kilgore, real quickly, we were going to get a motion or a recommendation for approval of the missing middle contract before we move on for that item.
Motion.
I'll second.
I move.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. You're muted, Sandra, I think.
Okay. Roll call. Councilwoman Turner.
Aye.
Councilwoman Oakland.
Aye.
And myself. Aye.
Thanks, Ben.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure, and we can go ahead. It sounds like there's consensus, so Katie and I can go ahead and add downtown as a future topic for this committee. And we can refine that a little more about what that entails. And of course, we've got a lot of the planning department here, and I'm sure they'll be a integral part of that discussion.
Great. Thank you. I'd like to thank everyone today, and if no one else has any comments, we can adjourn.
Thanks, everyone. And
Bye, everyone.